The military police officer grabbed her arm. I said, "Stand down, ma'am," and then he laughed. Right in her face. A woman covered in blood, dirt, and 3 days of war, and he laughed. What he didn't know was that the exhausted, beaten down person standing in front of him had just survived something that would have killed most men twice his size. And inside the damaged bag she clutched our chest was information that could save or lose hundreds of American lives before sunrise. If you're new here, subscribe and follow this story all the way to the end. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. She hadn't slept in 72 hours. That was the first thing anyone who looked closely would have noticed, the deep hollowness behind her eyes. The way her eyelids carried a weight that no amount of willpower could fully lift. But Captain Lauren Whitaker had long ago stopped measuring time by sleep. She measured it by missions, by call signs, by the sound of enemy radar locking onto her aircraft and the split-second decisions that followed. Right now she measured time by heartbeats, because every heartbeat that passed was a heartbeat wasted. She stood at the outer perimeter of Redstone Air Force Base at 4:47 in the morning. And the eastern sky was still completely black, the kind of black that felt permanent. The kind that soldiers know well, not the darkness before dawn, but the darkness before something changes, and you don't know yet whether the change will save you or destroy everything you were trying to protect. Her boots hit the pavement with a steady, deliberate rhythm as she approached the main security checkpoint. The soles were caked with red-orange dust, the specific kind of dust that came from forward operating positions in arid terrain. The kind that embedded itself into the stitching of your clothes and didn't wash out. Her flight suit was torn at the left shoulder, a ragged edge that told the story of a violent extraction without needing a single word. There was a dark stain along her right forearm that had dried hours ago. She had wrapped it with whatever was available. It held. She didn't think about the arm. She thought about the data module pressed against the inner lining of her flight bag. That module was the only reason she was here. Not for herself. Not for recognition. Not to explain what had happened over the last 4 days, or to request medical attention, or to file a report about the classified operation that had nearly killed her. She was here because the information inside that module had a lifespan, and every hour she delayed, that information aged, and aged intelligence in combat was not just useless. It was dangerous. The security booth was lit in the flat fluorescent light of military installations everywhere in the world. A light that made everyone look tired and institutional. A young military police officer sat behind the barrier, leaning back in his chair with the casual authority of someone who had never had a shift that surprised him. He was maybe 23 years old. His uniform was immaculate. His posture was that of someone who had never had to think quickly. She walked toward the gate. He looked up, and she watched his face do exactly what she expected it to do. His eyes moved from her boots to her torn flight suit to her face, and he completed the calculation in about 2 seconds. The calculation was wrong, but he didn't know that yet. He saw a woman who looked like she had been through something bad and had somehow wandered to the wrong place while recovering from it. He saw someone out of place, someone who needed to be redirected. Maybe someone who needed an ambulance. Maybe someone who needed a kind but firm explanation of where the correct entrance was. He did not see a combat pilot. He did not see a veteran. He did not see someone who was running on willpower and mission priority, and the specific, highly disciplined focus that only certain kinds of people ever develop. He saw a problem, a manageable problem, a Tuesday morning problem. He stood up and stepped out of the booth with his hand already raised. "Stop right there, ma'am." Lauren stopped, not because he told her to. She stopped because she was running a quick assessment of the checkpoint, the position of the cameras. The second officer she could see near the inner gate, the older sergeant visible through the glass of the booth, who had not moved yet, but whose head had lifted when she approached. She filed all of it in about 1 second and returned her attention to the young officer in front of her. I need access to the 25 Wing Command Center, she said. Her voice was steady, not aggressive, not pleading. The voice of someone reporting a fact. The officer smiled. Not a friendly smile. The kind of smile that people use when they want to communicate that they have the authority in this situation, and you do not. And they are being generous by explaining this to you calmly instead of escalating immediately. Ma'am, this is a restricted area. I'm going to need you to step back from the gate and identify yourself. Captain Lauren Whitaker, she said. A-10 Thunderbolt II, 23rd Fighter Wing. I returned from a classified forward operation 40 minutes ago via emergency extraction. My primary identification was lost with my gear during the extraction. I have temporary authorization paperwork and a classified data module that requires immediate delivery to Wing Command. She reached into the flight bag. His hand moved to his belt. She paused, looked at him. Paperwork, she said quietly. I'm reaching for paperwork. She pulled out a folded set of documents and held them out. He took them, looked at them, flipped through them with the confidence of someone who was not actually reading them carefully. She could see at the glance, not the read, the performance of scrutiny without the substance of it. He handed them back. Anyone can get paperwork made up. Lauren felt something sharpen inside her chest. Not anger. Anger was a luxury she didn't have time for. What she felt was something colder and more efficient, the recognition that this was going to take longer than it should. And that longer meant the data module in her bag was sitting still when it needed to be moving. Corporal, she said, I need you to scan those documents. They have a verification code that connects directly to the Wing Commander's office. The scan will take 30 seconds. I know how to do my job. Ma'am, then do it. Something changed in his eyes. The casual confidence tightened into something harder. Ma'am, I'm going to ask you one more time to step back from the gate. Telling you one more time that I have time-sensitive classified intelligence that needs to reach command right now. Every minute we stand here is a minute that information isn't where it needs to be. That's not my concern. It will be. He stepped closer. Closer than procedure required. Closer than it needed to be. It was a posture move, a way of using his size, his uniform, his position at the gate to communicate that this conversation was over and the outcome was already decided. Lauren didn't step back. She had not, in 11 years of military service, stepped back from something simply because someone larger than her stepped forward. She held his gaze. From inside the booth, the older Sergeant Staff Sergeant Marcus Webb had stopped what he was doing. He was watching now. He had been in the Air Force for 21 years and he had learned over those years to pay attention to things that didn't quite fit the expected pattern. The young corporal, Denny Rolston, was doing everything by the version of the book that young MPs followed when they felt their authority being questioned. Marcus understood that. He had done the same thing at 23. But the woman at the gate was not behaving the way civilians behaved when they were confused or lost or accidentally in the wrong place. She wasn't nervous, she wasn't backing down. And her eyes, he could see her eyes from here, they were the eyes of someone performing a continuous tactical assessment of every element of the situation around her. The way she stood was not the posture of exhaustion. It was the posture of controlled readiness. She was managing her fatigue, not surrendering to it. Marcus had seen that posture before. He had seen it in combat veterans returning from deployment. He had seen it in pilots who had just climbed out of cockpits after hard missions. He reached for the intercom inside the booth. Out at the gate, Corporal Rolston had made a decision. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step aside so I can contact my supervisor. Your supervisor is 20 feet behind you, Lauren said. Rolston glanced back involuntarily. Marcus was already walking toward the gate. Rolston turned back to the woman, and for the first time since she arrived, he felt the slight, uncomfortable sensation that maybe he had miscalculated something. But he pushed it down. He was an MP at a secure military installation. She was an unverified individual at a restricted gate with no valid ID. Procedure was procedure. Step back, ma'am. He reached forward with one hand, not to grab, but to gesture, to reinforce the instruction with physical communication, the way he had been trained. Lauren looked at his hand. Then she looked at him. Don't, she said, one word. And the way she said it, flat, precise, without any performance of emotion, stopped Corporal Rolston more completely than any physical action could have. Marcus reached the gate. He looked at the woman. He looked at the flight bag she was carrying. He looked at the way she was standing. Corporal, he said. Stand down. Sergeant, I have the situation. I said stand down. Rolston stepped back. His jaw was tight. Marcus looked at Lauren. Ma'am. I'm Staff Sergeant Marcus Webb. Can I ask what operation you were attached to? I can't discuss the operation outside a secure facility, she said. What I can tell you is that I'm Captain Lauren Whitaker. I'm a combat-qualified A-10 pilot with the 23rd Fighter Wing, and I'm carrying a classified data on a module from a forward intelligence collection operation that requires delivery to Colonel David Hargrove at Wing Command. The module contains time-sensitive information regarding active air operations. Marcus studied her for 2 full seconds. Then he said, "Can I see the authorization paperwork?" She handed it to him. He read it. Actually read it. She watched his eyes move line by line, not performing attention, but actually paying it. When he finished, he looked up. The verification code on this paperwork will connect to the Wing Commander's office when scanned. 30 seconds, Marcus nodded once. Corporal Rolston. Scan the paperwork. Sergeant, I already determined, Corporal. Marcus's voice dropped to a register that communicated, without any ambiguity, that this was not a discussion. Scan the paperwork. Rolston took the documents, walked to the scanner. In the silence that followed, Lauren became aware for the first time in several minutes of the pain in her arm. Not dramatically, it didn't announce itself. It was simply there, patient, waiting for the moment when she had nothing more important to focus on. She told it to keep waiting. The scanner chimed. The screen lit up. Rolston stared at it. His expression changed. Not dramatically. Not the way it happens in movies where someone's face collapses into obvious shock. It was something quieter and more significant than that, the quiet of someone whose internal model of a situation has just been revised completely, and who hasn't yet figured out what to do with the new information. He turned around slowly. Marcus was already moving. He took 3 quick steps toward the inner gate controls and pressed his palm to the reader. The security barrier began to rise. Captain Whitaker, Marcus said, and his voice had changed. Not in deference, not in performance, but in accuracy. He was simply now addressing the correct person. I'll escort you to Wing Command directly. Lauren picked up her flight bag. She walked through the gate. As she passed Corporal Rolston, she didn't stop. She didn't look at him with contempt. She didn't make a performance of the moment. She simply said, without slowing her pace, "Next time, read the paperwork before you decide what you're looking at." She kept walking. Rolston stood at the gate with the scanner still in his hand and said nothing. He didn't have anything to say. The runway lights stretched out ahead of her, and Lauren Whitaker moved through them with the same steady, deliberate pace she'd maintained for the last 4 days. Through enemy territory, through a failing aircraft, through an emergency extraction that should have killed her, through a security gate staffed by a young man who had never learned that the most important things in a military installation are not always wearing the right uniform. She was inside now, and the clock inside her head, the one that had been running since she pulled the data module from a forward position 300 miles away, was still ticking. Marcus Webb walked beside her through the interior corridor, his pace matching hers without effort. He had worked long enough that he could move at the speed a situation required, without making it look urgent to anyone they passed. That was important right now. They did not need questions. They did not need heads turning. The fewer people who noticed Captain Lauren Whitaker moving through the base at 4:52 in the morning, the better for everyone. You've been out there 4 days, he said. 3 days, 19 hours, she said. Extraction was clean? Extraction was functional, she said. Aircraft did not survive. Marcus processed that. Functional extraction, lost aircraft. He wanted to ask more. But she was moving at a pace that communicated the question could wait. Colonel Hargrove is going to want to debrief immediately, he said. That's why I'm here. The base has been on elevated security since yesterday. She glanced at him. Why? Communications anomaly. Something went sideways in the network around 2,100 hours last night. Command brought in the cybersecurity team, but they hadn't identified the cause as of an hour ago. Lauren's pace slowed for exactly 1 step. Then she continued walking, but something had shifted in her expression. Marcus noticed it, the slight tightening around her eyes. The way her attention had reorganized around something. What kind of anomaly? She asked. Traffic irregularities. Unauthorized access attempts on the flight operations server. They didn't get in, or at least that's what the initial assessment said. But Command wasn't convinced. Who authorized the security elevation? Colonel Hargrove. Based on a recommendation from intelligence. Last night, she said. More to herself than to him. Around 2,100, yeah. She didn't say anything else. But Marcus could see her thinking. Not just processing information, but connecting it to other information he couldn't see. The way her gaze went inward, even while she continued moving through the corridor, that was the look of someone assembling a picture from pieces that shouldn't fit together but were starting to. How much farther to Wing Command? She asked. 4 minutes. Make it 2. Marcus lengthened his stride. Wing Command at 4:55 in the morning was not quiet. That should have been Lauren's first indication that something was worse than a communications anomaly. Military installations had a rhythm even at elevated security. Even at night, there was a certain frequency of activity that corresponded to the threat level. What she saw when Marcus pushed open the door to the command center was operating at a frequency that didn't match a communications anomaly. It matched something significantly worse. Officers were moving between stations with the specific, tight-shouldered focus that Lauren had seen twice before in her career. Once before a major combat air operation, and once during an actual in-progress emergency. Screens displayed data that people were reading with urgency rather than attention. The room had the controlled acoustic signature of voices being kept deliberately low because the information being discussed was not for general consumption. Colonel David Hargrove at the center of it, a big man in his 50s with the kind of bearing that came from watching combat operations long enough to know the difference between a problem and a catastrophe. He was looking at a screen when the door opened. He didn't look up immediately. Sir, Marcus said. Hargrove looked up. His eyes found Lauren. Something moved across his face. Relief was part of it. And urgency was part of it. And something harder to define was also there. The specific expression of someone who has been waiting for a piece of information they need and has not been sure it was going to arrive. Whitaker, he said. Sir. She crossed the room, reached into the flight bag. Placed the data module on the table in front of him. Forward collection. The full take from the last 78 hours. Hargrove's hand went to the module immediately. He looked at it, then at her. Are you cleared to brief? I can brief as soon as you've had someone look at the module. He turned to the room. Ramirez, a technical sergeant, materialized from somewhere to his left. Hargrove handed her the module without explanation. She took it and moved to a secure terminal without question. Hargrove turned back to Lauren, looked at her torn flight suit. Her wrapped arm. The 3 days of forward deployment written across every visible surface. Medical? He asked. After the brief, she said. He studied her for a moment. Then nodded. Give me what you have. Lauren pulled a chair out from the table. Sat down and began to talk. She talked for 11 minutes without stopping. Not because she had memorized the information, though she had. Because she always did, but because the information had a shape. And she needed to present that shape completely before the question started. Because once the question started, the shape would get interrupted, and the pieces that connected might not get connected in the right order. She told him about the surveillance pattern she had identified from the air, the specific timing of enemy movements that suggested pre-knowledge of air operation schedules, the communication signals her aircraft's intelligence package had detected in the final hours before she was forced down signals that were using a frequency that should not have been accessible to the enemy. The way the ambush had been positioned, not guessing, not estimated, but precisely calibrated, as if someone had told them exactly where to be and when. When she finished, the room was different, not loud, not full of reaction. The opposite, the specific, weighted silence of people who have just received information that changes the frame of everything they were already thinking about. Hargrove was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You're telling me the ambush was coordinated from inside." "I'm telling you the positioning is consistent with inside knowledge," Lauren said. "The data will confirm or deny. But the pattern I observed from the air, the timing, the placement, it doesn't read as tactical improvisation. It reads as prepared execution." Hargrove looked at the screen where Sergeant Ramirez was working with the module. "The network anomaly last night," Lauren said. He looked back at her. "Tell me about it," she said. "When exactly did it start? What systems were targeted? Whether the flight operations server was the primary target or whether it was accessed incidentally." Hargrove was quiet again. But it was a different kind of quiet, the quiet of someone reassessing a situation they thought they understood. "You think they're connected," he said. "I think," Lauren said carefully, "that if someone inside had access to air operation schedules, and that same someone knew I was returning with forward intelligence, they would have a significant interest in either intercepting what I carried or disrupting the base's ability to act on it." The room had gone completely still. Hargrove looked at her. Then he looked around the room. And for the first time since Lauren had walked into Wing Command, she saw something in Colonel David Hargrove's face that she had not expected to see there. He was uncertain. Not about her, not about the data. About the people in the room. And Lauren understood why. If there was an insider, they could be anyone, including someone standing in this room right now. Sergeant Ramirez called out from the terminal, "Colonel, I have the module decrypted. You're going to want to see this." Hargrove moved to the terminal. Lauren followed. On the screen, the raw data from the forward collection operations was uncompressed and organized into readable form. Ramirez had already tagged the sections by category: communications intercepts, timing date, positional recordings, signal analysis. But it was the final section that stopped Hargrove in mid-step. The section was labeled Internal Correlation. Lauren had built it herself, in the forward position, before she was extracted. Using the intelligence collection equipment on her aircraft and the analysis she had done over 3 days of observation, she had created a correlation file, a document that mapped the timing of enemy movements against the timing of specific air operation communications. The correlation was not perfect, but it was close enough. Close enough to indicate that someone with access to air operation scheduling data had been providing that data to enemy forces at intervals consistent with mission planning windows. Hargrove read it, then he read it again. Then he turned to Lauren. "This goes up the chain immediately," he said. "Yes, sir. This room goes to information lockdown." He turned to the officers around him. "Nobody discusses what was just briefed outside this facility. Nobody makes calls. Nobody sends messages. Understood?" A chorus of "yes, sir" moved through the room. Hargrove turned back to Lauren. "You need medical," he said. "I know. After that, I want you in the debrief room with intelligence." "Yes, sir." He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, quietly, not for the room, not as a performance, "Good work getting back." Lauren picked up her flight bag. "I had intelligence that needed to be here," she said. "That's what got me back." She walked toward the door. Behind her, she could hear Hargrove already giving instructions, his voice dropping into the clipped, specific frequency of a commander initiating a serious response. She could hear Ramirez pulling up additional files. She could hear the room reorganizing itself around the new information. She pushed through the door and walked into the corridor. Marcus Webb was still there. He fell into step beside her without being asked. "Medical is this way," he said. "I know where medical is." They walked in silence for a moment. Then Marcus said, "The young corporal at the gate, what about him? He's going to be replaying this morning for a while." Lauren didn't break stride. "Good," she said. "That's how you learn." "Is that how you learned?" She thought about that for exactly one step. "Nobody laughed at me at a gate," she said. "I learned differently." "How?" She glanced at him. "I learned by surviving things that were trying to kill me," she said. "One way or another, we all end up at the same place. We just take different roads to get there." Marcus didn't say anything to that. There wasn't much to say. They walked down the corridor, the fluorescent lights steady above them, the rest of the base continuing its work around them, the pilots and ground crew and intelligence officers and support staff, who did not yet know what was sitting inside Applet, the classified AA module that had just been delivered to Wing Command. They did not know what was coming. Lauren knew. And as she walked toward the medical bay, arm throbbing, eyes heavy with 72 hours without sleep, she ran the internal correlation again, in her own memory, the timing sequences, the communication windows, the positional data, and she felt the shape of it sharpening. Whoever had provided that information to the enemy had expected her not to come back. They had positioned the ambush for exactly that purpose. She had survived it. She had come back, and now the data was in Hargrove's hands. But there was one more detail that Lauren had not included in her verbal brief. One element that she had kept back, not because it wasn't relevant, but because it was too specific, too identifiable. And she needed to know more before she placed it in front of a room full of people she didn't yet have reason to trust. In the final hours of the operation, before she was forced to extract, her aircraft's intelligence package had captured something specific. A directional communication signal, transmitting from a location consistent with the perimeter of Redstone Air Force Base itself. Not from overseas. Not from an enemy position, from here. The leak wasn't someone who had access to information from outside the base. The leak was someone who was physically present on this installation. Lauren walked through the medical bay door. She sat down. She let the medic begin working on her arm. And she thought about the room she had just left, the officers, the technical staff, the people Hargrove trusted, and she began, methodically and carefully, to think about which one of them would have known, which one of them would have had access, which one of them had been positioned, in every operation over the past 3 months, to see exactly what the enemy had known. The medic said something about a laceration. Lauren said, "I understand," without hearing the specifics. She was already somewhere else. She was already running the next mission. The medic's name was Airman First Class Teresa Voss, and she had been patching up people at Redstone for 3 years. She had seen pilots come back from hard missions. She had seen ground crew after accidents. She had seen men who cried and men who refused to acknowledge that anything was wrong with them. And she had learned to work around both without making it worse. She had not seen someone like Lauren Whitaker before. Most people, when they sat down in the medical bay after 72 hours without sleep and a laceration that had been healed, dressed with whatever was available, did one of two things. They either surrendered to the chair, let the fatigue pull them down like water finding its level, or they fought it so hard that their hands shook. Either way, the body announced itself. Lauren's body was quiet. Not relaxed. Not shut down. Quiet in the way that a motor is quiet when it's running at exactly the right temperature, not because it isn't working, but because every part of it is doing precisely what it was designed to do. She sat in the chair with her right arm extended and her left hand resting flat on her thigh. And while Teresa cut away the field dressing and assessed the damage underneath, Lauren stared at a point on the wall approximately 18 inches above the medical supply cabinet and didn't move her eyes from it. Teresa had learned that when someone stared like that, they weren't seeing the wall. "This is going to need stitches," Teresa said. 6, maybe 8. The edges are clean, but they've been held together with friction tape. She looked at the dressing she'd removed a while. "Do what you need to do," Lauren said. "I'm going to give you a local anesthetic, don't bother." Teresa paused. "Captain, the procedure without Airman Voss." Lauren's eyes moved from the wall to Teresa's face. "I need to remain fully alert. A local will take the edge off more than just the pain." "Skip it." Teresa looked at her. She had the specific expression of a medical professional who disagrees with a patient's decision but recognizes that the patient has the authority to make it. She set the anesthetic down. "All right," she said. "Tell me if I need to stop." "You won't need to stop," Teresa began. Lauren didn't make a sound. She returned her gaze to the wall and continued thinking about the directional signal. The one that had originated from within the perimeter of this installation. She had captured it at 317 hours, 3 days ago, during the final phase of the collection operation. The signal had lasted 44 seconds. It was encrypted, not the standard military encryption that her equipment would have flagged automatically, but a layered civilian-grade encryption running beneath a military frequency shell. Someone had been clever about it, not clever enough, but clever. The signal had transmitted once, 44 seconds, and then gone completely silent, as if whoever sent it knew exactly how long they had before it could be traced. 44 seconds was enough. 44 seconds. At the transmission rate the signal was using, was enough to send the complete schedule for the next 72 hours of air operations in the operational sector. Exact aircraft, exact timing windows, exact ingress and egress corridors. Everything the enemy would need to position an ambush and execute it with surgical precision. Everything they had used. Teresa tied off the final stitch. "Done," she said. 7. "I want to wrap this properly. I'm going to use a compression bandage." "Fine, you need fluids. You're dehydrated." "After the debrief." After the debrief." "Airman, I'll come back." Teresa wrapped the arm quickly and efficiently. She had accepted that this particular patient was going to do things on her own timeline. She taped the bandage and stepped back. "You need to eat something before you go anywhere else." Lauren stood up from the chair. For exactly 1 second, standing cost her more than she expected. Her legs remembered the 72 hours before her head did, and the chair had let her muscles acknowledge what they had been doing. And now they were announcing that acknowledgement loudly. She absorbed it, redistributed her weight. Her legs held. She reached into her flight bag and took out a compressed nutrition bar that had been there since the beginning of the operation. She unwrapped it, while walking toward the door, took a bite. Teresa watched her go. "You're welcome," Teresa said. To the air. "From somewhere near the door," Lauren said. "Thank you, Airman Voss." And then she was gone. The corridor outside the medical bay was brighter than Lauren expected, or maybe her eyes had adjusted down during the time she spent inside and were now recalibrating. She moved down the hall and ate the nutrition bar without tasting it, and thought about the debrief that was waiting, and about the people who would be in the room, and about which of those people she needed to watch most carefully. She was 6 feet from the corner when she heard the voice. "Captain Whitaker." She stopped, turned. Corporal Denny Rolston was standing in the corridor behind her, still in his gate uniform, still carrying the slight stiffness of someone who had recently had a significant professional experience that they were still processing. His hands were at his sides, not on his belt, and his posture had changed. From what it had been at the gate, the casual authority was gone, and what remained was something less comfortable and more honest. Lauren looked at him. "Corporal," she said. He walked toward her. Stopped at a respectful distance, not the distance of protocol, the distance of someone who has recently realized that they misjudged a situation and is figuring out how to say so. Sergeant Webb told me what you're carrying, Rolston said. The data module. What's on it? He shouldn't have. No, ma'am. But he did. Rolston paused. He wanted me to understand what I was holding up at the gate. Lauren studied him. The nutrition bar was half finished in her hand. She finished it, folded the wrapper, and put it in her pocket. Is there something you need? Corporal? Rolston's jaw worked for a moment. He was choosing words and discarding them with the specific difficulty of someone who doesn't apologize easily, but has decided that this is one of the times that requires it. I owe you an apology, he said. I didn't handle the gate appropriately. I made a judgment based on he stopped. Tried again. I made a bad judgment. Lauren looked at him for a long moment. You made a judgment based on incomplete information, she said. That's not the problem. The problem is that you had access to complete information, the scanner, the verification system, and you chose not to use it because you'd already decided what you were looking at. Rolston's face tightened slightly. Not defensively, the tightening of someone recognizing an accurate descriptions of what they did. Yes, ma'am. In a combat environment, Lauren said, making decisions based on what you expect to see instead of what the evidence tells you gets people killed. At a security gate, it means someone carrying critical intelligence stands outside for 6 minutes while an enemy threat goes unaddressed. I understand. Do you? Yes, ma'am. I think I do now. Lauren picked up her flight bag. Good, she said. Then this conversation was worth something. She turned and continued down the corridor. Behind her, Corporal Rolston stood still for a moment. Then he straightened, turned, and walked back toward the gate. He walked differently than he had that morning. Not softer. Not shaken. Just differently, the way someone walks when they've recalibrated something internal that needed recalibrating and have decided to carry the new version forward instead of the old one. It was a small change. Most people wouldn't notice it. Marcus Webb, who had been waiting at the corridor junction and had seen the whole exchange, noticed it. He fell into step beside Lauren. You didn't have to do that, he said. I didn't do it for him, she said. He's going to be at that gate for another 2 years minimum. I want the person watching that gate to be someone who knows how to think. Marcus nodded. They walked in silence for a moment. Intelligence debrief room is on the 2nd floor, he said. I know. Colonel Hargrove has already assembled the team. Who's on the team? Marcus gave her the names. 4 officers from the base intelligence section, 1 technical analyst, the cybersecurity team that had been called in the night before, and a representative from the counterintelligence unit that Hargrove had quietly activated at some point between her briefing and now. Lauren processed the names. The cyber analyst, she said. How long has that person been on the base? About 8 months. Technical Sergeant Aaron Cho came from the Cyber Operations Center at Peterson. High clearance, strong record, and he was part of the team responding to the network anomaly last night? Lead analyst. Lauren absorbed that. She didn't say anything, but she made a note not on paper. Not in any way that would be visible to anyone watching her. Just in the organized interior space where she kept the things that mattered most, until she knew what to do with them. The debrief room was on the 2nd floor of the intelligence section building, behind a cipher-locked door and a secondary biometric reader that had been installed 6 months ago as part of a security upgrade. Lauren put her hand on the reader. It recognized her. The door opened. She walked in. 5 people looked up. Colonel Hargrove stood at the head of a rectangular table. To his left was Major Sandra Okafor, the base's primary intelligence officer, a tall woman in her early 40s, whose eyes moved with the specific economy of someone who had been trained to absorb everything in a room without appearing to focus on anything. To Hargrove's right was a man Lauren didn't know, probably the counterintelligence representative. Further down the table, 2 more officers whose names Marcus had given her, Captain James Weller and Lieutenant Diane Park. And at the far end of the table, separated slightly from the others, by the physical geography of the room and the position of his laptop, was a lean, focused man in his 30s who was looking at Lauren with the careful, assessing attention of someone who was not sure yet whether she was an asset or a variable. Technical Sergeant Aaron Cho. Lauren sat down. Hargrove didn't waste time. The module is being fully processed by our secure systems. What Sergeant Ramirez has extracted so far is consistent with your verbal brief. We're now operating on the assumption that the anomaly last night and the intelligence you've brought back are connected events. What does the anomaly look like from the inside? Lauren asked. Cho answered before Hargrove could direct the question. Unauthorized query strings in the Flight Operations Database. Someone probed the scheduling architecture between 2047 and 2118 hours last night. They didn't successfully extract data. As far as we can determine, we have logging that should anti-actual transfer, but the probing was sophisticated. They knew the structure of the system. You said should show, Lauren said. Cho looked at her steadily. Logging systems can be manipulated if you know where to intervene. Can you tell if the logging was manipulated? That's what I'm trying to determine. How long will that take? It's not a fast process. The manipulations I'd be looking for would be designed to be invisible. I'm looking for the shape of the absence, what should be there that isn't. Lauren looked at him. He held her gaze without difficulty. She noted that. What I can tell you, she said, turning to the full table, is that the signal I captured in the forward position was transmitted from within this installation's perimeter. That means whoever is providing information to the enemy is not doing it remotely. They are physically present on this base. The room absorbed that. Major Okafor said, "You're certain about the signal origin. The directional data is in the module. You'll be able to verify the origin point independently." But yes, I'm certain. Okafor and Hargrove exchanged a look. It was brief, a quarter second of eye contact that communicated a significant amount of information between two people who had worked together long enough to develop a shared language of glances. Lauren caught it and cataloged it without reacting. The counterintelligence officer, who introduced himself as Major Calvin Reese, leaned forward. "Captain Whitaker, the signal you captured, you said it was encrypted. Civilian-grade encryption under a military frequency shell. Can you tell us anything about the specific encryption protocol?" The collection system tagged it as a variant of a commercial communication protocol that's been modified for operational security. The specific variant has been used before. There are 2 documented cases in the intelligence database from the last 18 months, both from other theaters. Both involving what was ultimately determined to be insider-facilitated intelligence compromise. Reese sat back. His face didn't change, but his pen, which had been resting still in his hand, moved to the notepad and wrote something down. Lauren noted that too. The pattern, she continued, suggests someone with both technical knowledge and operational knowledge. Technical enough to construct a layered encryption that evades standard monitoring. Operational enough to know exactly which information is worth transmitting and when. That's not a casual leak. That's a deliberate, practiced operation. Practiced, Hargrove said. The word landed in the room like a weight. You're saying this has been going on for a while. I'm saying the level of operational security around the transmission suggests experience. You don't build that kind of encryption wrapper for a one-time message. You build it for repeated use. Weller, who had been quiet until now, said, "If they've been doing this for a while, why are we only finding out about it now?" "Because I survived," Lauren said. The room was quiet. She didn't elaborate immediately, and the silence gave the statement room to settle. Then she continued, "The ambush was positioned to intercept my aircraft specifically. The timing, the location, the configuration, it was designed to look like tactical contact. But the variables are too precise for it to have been anything other than targeted. Someone knew I was running a collection operation in that sector. Someone knew when I would be there. That information would have been in the mission planning files," Okafor said. "Yes," Lauren said. "And the mission planning files live in the flight operations server. Every eye in the room moved. almost involuntarily toward Aaron Cho. Cho looked at the table, then back up. His expression was controlled. "I'm aware of what you're implying," he said. "I was the lead analyst on the network anomaly response last night. I have access to the flight operations server as part of that role. I'm not implying anything about you specifically," Lauren said. "I'm identifying the access point. Whoever did this would have needed access to the mission planning files. That's a specific limited population of people. Some of them are in this room." Hargrove's voice was even. "Which is why we're going to do this correctly. Major Reese will coordinate with counterintelligence to establish a full access audit every person with query access to the flight operations planning architecture in the last 30 days. That list is going to be longer than you want it to be," Weller said. "Then we make it smaller," Hargrove said. "We cross-reference it with the communication anomaly data, the transmission timing Whitaker identified, and whatever else the module gives us. We build the case from evidence, not assumption." Lauren agreed with that. She said nothing, but she was already building it from assumption, or rather, from pattern, and the pattern was narrowing. She knew that the signal had transmitted at 317 hours. 3 days ago. She knew that the flight operations server had been probed the previous night, between 2047 and 2118 hours. She knew that both events shared a technical fingerprint, not exactly the same, but variations of the same underlying approach. Someone who understood system architecture and communications security well enough to construct an invisible probe and an encrypted transmission. And she knew one more thing that she hadn't said yet. The 44-second transmission she had captured had not been sending the full operational schedule. She had analyzed the transmission volume against the encryption rate during the return flight. The data volume was too small for a complete schedule extract. It was targeted specific information, not a bulk download. Someone had known exactly what to request. That meant they had been directed. And being directed meant there was a conversation, some form of communication, in which they received instructions about what to pull and when to send it. That conversation had happened somewhere, and somewhere was a trail. Lauren looked down at the table for a moment, organizing her thoughts into the order in which they needed to be presented. She looked up. "I need to see the access logs for the planning server," she said. "Not just the anomaly window from last night. The full 30-day history. Every query, every user ID, every timestamp." Reese said. "That's going to require authorization from—" "I can authorize it," Hargrove said. He looked at Lauren. "What are you looking for, specifically?" "A pattern," she said. "Not a large one. The person doing this is careful. They're not taking big chunks of information at irregular intervals. They're taking small, specific queries at regular intervals designed to look like normal operational access. The pattern will be there, but it'll be hidden inside the background noise of legitimate use." "Hidden how?" Okafor asked. "By timing," Lauren said. "If I were doing this accessing information I wasn't supposed to be accessing, but couldn't afford to have flagged, I would time my queries to coincide with periods of high server activity. Peak planning windows. Times when everyone in the operations section is pulling information simultaneously and one more query disappears into the volume." Cho was very still on the other side of the table. Lauren looked at him. "When are the peak query windows on the flight operations server?" she asked. It was a direct question, innocent on its surface. She was asking the cyber analyst for technical information, which was his role. But the question had a second layer that everyone in the room heard clearly enough. It was also asking whether he knew the answers immediately, without looking it up, with the specificity of someone who had already been thinking about those windows for reasons unrelated to the anomaly response. Cho answered without hesitation. 600 to 730 during morning mission planning. 1,400 to 1,530 during the afternoon update cycle. And 2,000 to 2,100 during the pre-dawn operation prep window. He paused. Then he said, which is exactly when the anomaly occurred last night. 2047 to 2118. Right inside the evening window. Yes, Lauren said. Right inside it. The room was quiet again. Cho looked at her steadily. She looked back at him. Between them, something was happening that wasn't quite accusation and wasn't quite alliance. It was the careful, mutual assessment of two technically capable people trying to figure out whether the other one was an adversary, or a tool, or something else entirely. Then Cho said the 30-day access logs. I can pull those right now. Full history, every query string, every user ID and timestamp. You want them by peak window grouping? Lauren held his gaze. That's exactly how I want them, she said. Hargrove stood. Do it. Captain Whitaker will work with you on the analysis. Major Reese, I want counterintelligence to begin the background review on the access population immediately. Okafor, I need you on the signals data from the module. Get everything you can on that transmission and get it cross-referenced with our known enemy communication profiles. Weller, Park Operational Security Posture. I want every active mission file reviewed and every upcoming operation schedule treated as potentially compromised until further notice. The room moved. People reached for phones and devices and notebooks. The stillness of the debrief shattered into organized motion. Hargrove caught Lauren's eye as he moved toward the door and gave her a single nod, the compact, economical acknowledgement of a commander to someone who has just delivered something significant and is about to be asked to act for more. Lauren pulled her chair closer to Cho's end of the table. He turned his laptop so that she could see the screen. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. He was pulling the access logs. She was watching his hands on the keyboard, watching the specific, practiced efficiency of someone who knew this system's interface well enough to navigate it without reading prompts. That kind of fluency came from time, from regular use. You're good at this, she said. That's why they brought me in, Cho said. Peterson, right? Cyber Operations Center. 8 months ago. What brought you to Redstone specifically? Cho's hands didn't pause on the keyboard. Rotation assignment. Standard. Who requested you for this installation? Now his hands did pause. Just for a moment, half a second, barely perceptible. He looked at her. I don't know who put in the rotation request, he said. Those decisions happen above my level. But someone requested your specific skill set for this base, during this specific operational period. Apparently, Cho said. His voice was even. Why does that matter? It matters because someone with your access and your skills, placed on this installation 8 months ago, would have been in an ideal position to build exactly the kind of low-signature access pattern we're looking for. It would also describe the person best positioned to help you find that pattern, Cho said. Lauren said nothing. I know what you're doing, Cho said quietly. He wasn't angry, he was precise. You're working the access population. I'm part of it. That's correct procedure. I'd be doing the same thing in your position. Then you understand why I'm watching you work. I understand it completely. He turned the laptop toward her. The access logs were fully displayed, organized by timestamp, with the peak window periods highlighted in a way that Lauren had not asked for, but had clearly been something he had already noted. So let me suggest that instead of watching me for signs of guilt, you watch me work and let the data tell you something more useful. Lauren looked at the screen. The logs were extensive 30 days of query activity across the full planning server. Thousands of entries. If the pattern she was looking for was in there, it wasn't going to announce itself. It was going to require the kind of careful, systematic analysis that took time she wasn't sure she had. She leaned forward. Start with the evening windows, she said. 2000 to 2100, every night for the last 30 days. Filter out queries associated with standard duty accounts, the planners, the wing operations officer, the daily scheduling staff. Show me everything that's left. Cho's hands moved. The screen refreshed. What remained after the filter was smaller than she expected. 30 days of evening windows, minus the standard operational traffic. Left 17 residual queries. Some of them would have legitimate explanations, maintenance access. System administration, legitimate access by people working late. But 17 was a manageable number. She scanned the user IDs. 14 of them were familiar names she could map to roles and people without difficulty. 3 of them were not. She leaned closer. Those 3, she said. Cho looked at where her finger was pointing, not quite touching the screen. His voice, when he responded, was quieter than it had been. "Those are access credential strings I don't recognize," he said. "They're not in the base personnel database?" He typed quickly. Running a lookup. The lookup returned an error. An error that meant the credential IDs did not exist in any active personnel record on the installation. Lauren and Cho looked at the screen together in silence. Someone had been accessing the flight operations planning server using credentials that belonged to no one. Ghost credentials, built to look legitimate from the outside. Invisible to a standard audit. Visible only when you looked for the specific shape of an absence, exactly what Cho had described an hour ago as his method for finding manipulated logging. Lauren straightened. She looked at Cho. He looked back at her. "This wasn't the network anomaly," he said. His voice had shifted, not alarmed, but sharpened, the way a voice sharpens when something abstract becomes concrete. The anomaly last night, that was a distraction. Someone probed the system visibly, loudly enough to trigger a security response, so that we'd focus on the probe and miss this. "They've been in the system for 30 days, Lauren said. "At least," Cho said. The two of them stared at the screen. 30 days of ghost access, 3 times a week, always inside the highest traffic window. Invisible behind the noise of legitimate use. Taking small, targeted pieces of information, one query at a time, and transmitting it through a layered encrypted channel to an enemy that used it to plan operations with surgical precision and position an ambush that should have killed Captain Lauren Whitaker and destroyed the one piece of intelligence that could expose the entire thing. Outside the debrief room, the base was continuing its morning operations. Pilots were in briefing rooms. Ground crew were on the flight line. The administration section was beginning its day. Thousands of people doing their jobs on an installation that none of them knew had been compromised. Quietly and persistently, for at least a month, and somewhere on this base, the person who had built those ghost credentials was beginning their own morning. Unaware so far that the pilot they had tried to kill had landed. Lauren looked at Cho. "We need Hargrove," she said. "And we need to do this without putting a single word of it on any networked communication system until we know how deep the access goes." Cho was already closing the laptop. "Agreed," he said. Lauren stood. The pain in her arm was steady now. A reliable background signal that she had learned to use, rather than fight a reminder that she was operating on a body that had limits, which meant she needed to find the answer before those limits found her. She picked up her flight bag. Cho held the door. They moved out into the corridor together, and the door locked behind them with the quiet, decisive sound of a cipher resetting. Hargrove was standing outside the operations center when Lauren and Cho found him, talking in low-clipped sentences to Major Okafor. The moment he saw their faces, he stopped mid-sentence. "Walk with me," Lauren said. It wasn't a request. Hargrove recognized that and moved without questioning it. Okafor fell in on his left. The 4 of them moved down the corridor away from the main traffic flow, past the administrative section, into the quieter end of the building, where the storage and utility rooms were. Lauren waited until there was no one within 30 feet in any direction. Then she told him, "Ghost credentials, 30 days of access. 3 queries per week, always inside the peak traffic window. Invisible to a standard audit because they had been designed to disappear inside the background noise of legitimate operations. Targeted queries, not bulk downloads, not exploratory probing, but precise, specific pulls that corresponded exactly to the operational information that had been used against American aircraft in the field. Hargrove listened without interrupting. That alone told Lauren something about him, the disciplined patience of a commander who had learned that the instinct to respond immediately was not always your friend. When she finished, he was quiet for 3 full seconds. Then he said, "How confident are you?" "The credential strings don't exist in any active personnel record on this installation," Cho said. "I ran the lookup twice. They're ghost accounts created inside the system architecture to appear legitimate, but not tied to any real user profile. Who has the access level to create that kind of account?" "System administrators," Cho said. "And anyone who's been in the server architecture long enough to understand how account creation is logged and how to create one that doesn't trigger the standard logging protocols." "Which means someone technical," Hargrove said. "Yes," Cho said. Hargrove looked at him steadily. Lauren watched both of them. The moment had a specific weight to it, not accusation, not defense, but the uncomfortable geometry of a situation in which the person best positioned to explain the crime was also, structurally, a person who could have committed it. Cho held Hargrove's gaze. "Sir, I understand the position I'm in. I'm the technical analyst on this base with the deepest access to the systems in question. I was the lead on the anomaly response last night. If I were evaluating this situation from the outside, I would look at me first. And," Hargrove said, "and I'm asking you to let Captain Whitaker's data lead this. Not personnel assumptions. Because if we move on assumption and we're wrong, whoever actually built those ghosted accounts disappears the evidence before we can find them." Hargrove looked at Lauren. "He's right," she said, saying it cost her something not because she believed Cho was guilty, but because she was not yet certain he wasn't, and certainty was the standard she applied to everything. "The data leads. But we need to move carefully, and we need to move now, because if whoever built those credentials is monitoring their own access trail, they're going to know the logs were queried." "How long before they'd notice?" Hargrove asked. Cho answered, "Depends on how sophisticated their monitoring is. If they've built a passive alert into the logging system, which someone this careful might have done, they could already know. If not, we have hours, maybe less." Hargrove made the decision the way he made all of them, quickly, completely, without visible hesitation. "Okafor, I want a full communications blackout on this investigation from this moment. Nothing on networked systems. Everything in person or on isolated hardware. I want you to build an isolated analysis environment, physically disconnected from the main network, and transfer everything you've found to that environment before anyone else touches those logs." "That'll take about 40 minutes, Cho said. "You have 30, Hargrove said. "Whitaker, you're with me." They moved. The next 20 minutes had the specific, compressed intensity of a situation shifting from investigation to operation, the point where the intellectual work of finding a problem begins converting into the physical work of solving it before it solves you first. Lauren stayed at Hargrove's side as he moved through the building, making contacts, issuing instructions in person, building a response architecture that existed entirely outside the base's normal communication systems. Every person he brought into the circle received the same instruction first. Nothing on network, nothing on phones, talk to no one who isn't already in the room. It was a tight circle, 6 people total, including Lauren and Cho. At 6:43 in the morning, Cho had the isolated environment built and the access logs transferred. The 6 of them gathered in a small room on the 3rd floor that was normally used for equipment storage, not glamorous. Not the kind of room where anyone would expect a counterintelligence operation to be organized. Which was exactly why Hargrove chose it. Cho opened the isolated laptop and brought up the ghost credential access log. Major Reese, the counterintelligence officer, leaned in immediately. He had been quiet since the initial debrief, but Lauren had been watching him process the way his eyes moved. The pattern of what he wrote down, the specific questions he had and hadn't asked. Reese was good. She had adjusted her initial assessment of him twice already. Both times upward. 3 credential strings, Reese said. Alternating access pattern. Never 2 consecutive days. Never the same credential used twice in a row. He studied the screen. This is a discipline. Someone trained in access security protocols. Military intelligence background, Lauren said. Or signals. Someone who knows how collection operations work from the inside and knows what safeguards to build against. That narrows the population, Reese said. To about 40 people on this base, Okafor said. 37, Cho said without looking up. He had already been running the cross-reference. I pulled the personnel database while I was building the isolated environment. People with both systems access at the required level and a background in signals or intelligence collection. 37 active personnel. Everyone looked at him. He looked back. I'm thorough, he said, and I know what it looks like. But if I were going to help cover something up, I wouldn't have just handed the colonel a list that includes myself. You're on the list, Hargrove said. It wasn't a question. Number 11, Cho said. Alphabetical. The room absorbed that. Lauren looked at the list. Duty position. Access levels. 37 people on an installation of several thousand who occupied the specific intersection of technical capability and intelligence background that the operation required. The transmission timing, Lauren said. The 44-second signal I captured originated from the base perimeter at 317 hours. 3 days ago. What physical areas of the installation are accessible at that time with that level of communications and capability? Reese answered. The signals monitoring station on the north perimeter. The communications relay building on the east side. The maintenance bay adjacent to the aircraft shelter complex, which has a shielded communications closet. He paused. And any vehicle positioned near the perimeter fence with a mobile communications package. Of those locations, Lauren said. Which ones would require specific authorization to access at 317 hours? The signal station and the relay building both require after-hours authorization logged to a badge scan, Okafor said. Pull the badge logs, Lauren said to Hargrove. That specific night. 200 to 400. Every badge scan at those 2 locations. Hargrove looked at Reese. Reese was already writing. The badge log request had to go through a physical access to the security administration system, another isolated pull. Another person added carefully to the circle. Hargrove sent Okafor to handle it personally, with instructions to pull the data to a physical drive and return, without discussing it with anyone. While they waited, Lauren sat down for the first time since the debrief room. The storage room had a metal folding chair against one wall, and she took it. Not because she wanted to rest, but because her legs had started carrying a low vibration that she recognized as the early signal of a system approaching its operational limit. She had pushed her body through harder and longer, and she would push it further if she had to. But sitting down for 10 minutes while they waited for the badge logs cost nothing and bought something. Hargrove sat down on a equipment case across from her. Tell me about the forward operation, he said, quietly. Not in his commander's voice in this, someone who wanted to understand something he hadn't been told yet. Lauren looked at him. The full debrief is going to take hours. Sir, I don't need the full debrief right now. I need to understand the targeting. You said the ambush was positioned for you specifically. How certain are you? Certain enough to stake this investigation on it, she said. The enemy forces were in position 6 hours before my aircraft reached that sector. 6 hours, sir. My mission window wasn't finalized until 8 hours before departure. That gives them a 2-hour margin to receive the information, make the decision, and move assets into position. She paused. That's tight. But it's possible if the information was transmitted the moment the planning window closed. Hargrove was quiet. The planning window closed at 1,847 hours. 4 days ago, Lauren continued. If someone queried the mission planning file at 1,850 and transmitted at 1,855, the enemy would have had the information by 1,900. 6 hours to position. My aircraft reached the sector at 310. The math works. And the ghost credential query logs, Hargrove said slowly. Do we have an entry from that window? Cho, who had been listening from the other side of the room, answered, I haven't cross-referenced that specific date yet. I was working from the 30-day pattern. He looked at the isolated laptop. But I can check right now. Check, Hargrove said. Cho pulled up the logs, filtered to 4 days ago, narrowed to the window between 1,847 and 1,900. The room was completely still. Cho looked at the screen. Yes, he said. 1,851 hours. Ghost credential string 2, single query. Duration 4 seconds. The targeted file he paused, reading, is the mission planning record for Operation Designation 77 Kilo. Lauren's mission. No one said anything. In the silence, the shape of the operation became fully clear for the first time, not as a theory, not as a pattern, but as a documented sequence of events. A ghost account querying a mission file at 1,851, a 44-second transmission sent from the base perimeter. 6 minutes later, an ambush positioned and ready when Lauren's aircraft arrived at the sector at 310. A chain of causation, deliberate and precise, built by someone who had known exactly what they were doing. Someone who had known enough about Lauren's mission to understand that if it succeeded, the intelligence she brought back could expose everything. Someone who had tried to make sure it didn't succeed. 1,851, Lauren said, who was logged and to the outshrift at 1,851 hours 4 days ago, and who was physically on duty in or near the operations section at that time, Reese said. We'll get that from the duty log. But that's another records pull. We're pulling everything, Hargrove said. Keep building the picture. Okafor returned 17 minutes later with a physical drive containing the badge access logs. She handed it to Cho without speaking. He connected it to the isolated laptop and began the extraction. The room waited. Lauren had stopped feeling the chair 20 minutes ago. She was running the logic again, not because she doubted it, but because she was looking for the flaw she might have missed, the alternative explanation she hadn't considered. That was how she flew, not with overconfidence, but with constant self-audit. The moment you stopped questioning your own read of a situation was the moment the situation became dangerous. The badge log appeared on the screen. Cho organized it by location and time. The signals monitoring station on the north perimeter, from 200 to 400 on the night of the transmission. 2 badge scans, one at 248, one at 311, 2 different personnel IDs. Cho ran them against the personnel database. The first came back immediately. An airman first class, assigned to the communications section on duty that night per the maintenance schedule. Legitimate access, no flags. The second took 3 seconds longer. When it came back, Cho looked at these for a moment before he said anything. Then he said, "This badge ID is assigned to Captain James Weller." The name moved through the room like a current. James Weller, who had been sitting at the debrief table 2 hours ago, who had heard everything Lauren briefed, who had heard the word insider, who had been in the room when Lauren described ghost credentials and targeted access patterns and a transmission from inside the perimeter, who had left the debrief room 40 minutes ago when Hargrove dismissed the broader group. Hargrove was already standing. "Where is Weller right now?" he said. Okafor reached for the duty roster, stopped herself not on the network. She looked at Hargrove. "He's assigned to the flight operations section this morning." "Standard duty. Flight operations," Lauren said. "Where the planning server lived. Where the ghost credentials had been built. Where someone with 30 days of careful, invisible access had been systematically extracting mission-critical intelligence." Hargrove looked at Reese. "We need to locate him physically. Right now. Without alerting him." "If he was in the debrief and heard what Whitaker briefed," Reese said, his voice controlled but edged, "he already knows we're looking." "How much of a head start does he have?" Lauren said. 40 minutes, Okafor said. "Maybe 45. Lauren was already standing. The folding chair scraped the floor behind her. "He didn't run," she said. Everyone looked at her. If he was going to run, he would have started running the moment the debrief room cleared. He had 40 minutes. "He's still here." She said it with certainty. Not because she was guessing, but because she knew how this kind of person thought. She knew it from studying the enemy, from watching how people behaved when they were trapped, not physically, but informationally. "He's not running, he's cleaning," the server, Cho said. The ghost credentials, the access logs, the query history. Lauren was already moving toward the door. "If he can delete the evidence before we can secure it." "I copied everything to the isolated environment," Cho said. Moving alongside her, "He can't touch what's already off the network." But he doesn't know that. And the thing about someone who doesn't know the evidence is already secured, Lauren thought as she moved through the door and into the corridor, is that they will still try to destroy it. They will go to the server and attempt to erase what they believe is there. And when they do that, they will be standing at the exact location of the crime, with their hands on the systems. Which means they will be caught. The corridor opened up as they moved toward the stairwell. Hargrove was on her right, Reese on her left, Cho half a step behind. Okafor had peeled off to make physical contact. Person to person with the security section, to position 2 people near the flight operations server room, without alerting Weller directly. Lauren took the stairs 2 at a time. Her arm sent a sharp complaint upward through her shoulder. She filed it and kept moving. The flight operations section was on the ground floor of the main building. A large room that housed the mission planning systems, the scheduling architecture, and the servers that maintained the operational database for the 23rd Fighter Wing. At any given time during the duty day, there were between 12 and 20 people working in that space. It was not a place where you could do anything invisible. But Weller had been invisible for 30 days. He had been invisible in a room full of people who trusted him, in a system surrounded by safeguards, in an installation designed to be secure. He had been invisible because no one had been looking for what he was. Lauren pushed through the door to the operations section. The room was in its normal morning configuration, people at workstations. The ambient sound of keyboards and low conversations. The organized, productive noise of a military operations center in its daily rhythm. She scanned the room in 1 second. James Weller was not at his workstation. She looked at the server room door at the back of the section. It was ajar. She moved. Hargrove moved with her. People at workstations looked up, not with alarm. Not yet, because 2 officers moving through a room was normal, and the pace was controlled enough that it read as purposeful rather than urgent. Lauren reached the server room door, pushed it open. Weller was standing at the primary server access terminal. His badge already swiped, his fingers on the keyboard. He had his back to the door, and he was moving quickly, not the speed of routine access, but the specific, tightly controlled speed of someone trying to accomplish something in less time than they have. He heard the door. He turned. Lauren and Hargrove were standing in the doorway. Weller looked at Lauren. His face did something complicated in about 1 second, the rapid internal sequence of someone whose plan has just encountered the specific obstacle they were afraid of. Not guilt, at least not the theatrical version. Something harder and more specific. The look of a person who made a calculated bet and has just seen the calculation come up wrong. "Captain Weller," Hargrove said. His voice was the quietest Lauren had ever heard from him. "Step away from the terminal." Weller didn't move immediately. His eyes went to Lauren. "I told you," he said, and his voice, surprisingly, was steady. Not defiant, not broken. Steady in a way that was stranger than either of those would have been. "I told you in the debrief. The list of people with that access level, I said it was going to be longer than you wanted it to be." "Step away from the terminal," Hargrove said again. Weller stepped back. 1 step. His hands came up slightly, not a surrender gesture. Not dramatic. Just the physical language of someone removing themselves from something they've been told to leave. "Whatever you think I deleted," he said. "I didn't have enough time." "We know," Lauren said. "The logs are already off the network." That landed. She watched it land, the specific physical reaction of a person receiving information that collapses a plan they had been executing. His jaw changed, his shoulders changed. Not dramatically, the small, real adjustments that a body makes when the internal pressure system shifts suddenly. "Cho pulled everything to an isolated environment before we came to find you," Lauren said. "The ghost credentials, the 30-day access pattern, the query on Operation 77 Kilo at 1,851 hours 4 days ago. The badge scan at the signal station at 311. It's all there. Preserved." Weller looked at the floor for a moment. Then he looked back up. "I want a lawyer," he said. "You'll have one," Hargrove said. "But you're going to step out of this room first." Two members of the security section appeared in the doorway behind Lauren and Hargrove. They had materialized with the quiet efficiency of people who had been briefed on what the situation required and had moved into position without making it visible. Professional. Clean. Weller walked toward the door. He passed Lauren. He stopped. For a moment he stood there, close enough that she could see the specific exhaustion in his face, not the exhaustion of someone who had been working hard, but the exhaustion of someone who had been carrying something heavy for a long time and has just put it down, even though the putting down was not voluntary and the consequences were waiting on the other side. "How did you survive?" he said quietly, just to her. "The ambush was perfect," Lauren said. "I know." Weller looked at her. "The aircraft wasn't," she said. "I put the aircraft between me and what they had positioned. I lost the plane. I walked out." Something moved through Weller's expression, not admiration, not regret, something more complex and less nameable. The look of someone who spent months building something meticulous and watching someone else's stubbornness and luck and skill dismantle it in a single night. Then the security officers moved him forward, and he walked out of the server room, and the door closed behind him. Lauren stood in the room alone for a moment. The server terminal was still lit. Weller's badge scan was still registered in the access log, the log he had been trying to erase. The log that had just become the final piece of documented evidence against him. The machine had recorded everything. She looked at the screen. Then she turned off the monitor and walked out. In the operations section, people had stopped working. They had felt the change in the room's atmosphere, the specific drop in ambient pressure that happens when something significant occurs nearby, even when you can't see what it is. People were looking at the server room door, at the two security officers who had just escorted a fellow officer out of the building, at the colonel who was now standing in the middle of their workspace with an expression that told them this was not a routine morning anymore. Hargrove spoke to the room, not loudly, not dramatically. "Flight operations is going into information lockdown, effective immediately. All active mission files are being reviewed and considered potentially compromised. You will receive updated instructions through your section chief. Do not discuss what you have seen in the last 10 minutes with anyone outside this building." The room was silent. Then, without instruction, without anyone leading it, people began to comply. Screens were shut down. Phones were set aside. The professional discipline of a military unit absorbing a hard moment and continuing to function settled over the room like something solid. Lauren watched it and felt something she hadn't expected to feel. Not relief, not triumph. Something quieter than that. The recognition that the systems worked not perfectly, not quickly enough, not without cost. A pilot's aircraft had been destroyed. An ambush had almost succeeded. An insider had operated invisibly for 30 days. But in the end, the people in this building were doing what they were trained to do, absorbing the damage and responding to it with discipline and clarity. That was worth something. That was worth a lot. She found Hargrove at the edge of the room. He was watching his people with the expression of a commander absorbing the full scope of what had just happened, not just the investigation, but the meaning of it, the breach, the 30 days, the people whose missions had been compromised without their knowledge. The interrogation is going to take time, Lauren said. Weller knows his rights. He'll say as little as possible. Reese will handle it, Hargrove said. He's the right person for it, the ghost credentials. Even with Weller in custody, there may be additional access points we haven't identified. The network needs a full forensic audit before it goes back online for mission planning. Agreed. Cho will lead it. Lauren nodded. And the upcoming operations, she said. Everything scheduled for the next 72 hours needs to be treated as compromised and replanned from scratch. Already being handled. Hargrove paused. Whitaker. She looked at him. You've been awake for 73 hours, he said. 74, she said. At some point, your body is going to make the decision for you. I know. I have 2 more things I need to do first. What are they? I need to sit with Cho while he starts the forensic audit and make sure we haven't missed a second access vector. If Weller built 3 ghost credentials, he might have built more. One person might not be the whole network. Hargrove's expression shifted. That was the thing about experienced commanders. They didn't waste energy on emotions that didn't help them think. What moved across his face was not shock, but the rapid recalculation of a threat level. You think there's more than one? I think we should confirm there isn't, Lauren said. And I think we should do it before Weller's lawyer tells him what we do and don't have. Hargrove was already moving. What's the second thing? Lauren looked across the room at the door through which James Weller had just been escorted out of his career and most likely his freedom. I need to write a complete technical brief on the transmission signal, she said. Everything I captured, every detail. So that if there is someone else, if Weller was working with someone who is still operational, we have a documented profile of the technique they're using and every system that technique touches. How long will that take? 4 hours if I have access to the module data and Cho's isolated system. You'll have it. They walked out of the operations section together. The corridor outside was quiet, the kind of quiet that follows a significant event. Before the institutional machinery of response has fully engaged and filled the space with its noise. Lauren kept moving. Her arm had stopped sending signals not because the damage was gone, but because her body had run out of bandwidth to carry the complaint. She noticed that, and noted it, and decided it was probably not a good sign, but was also not her most pressing problem. Her most pressing problem was a forensic audit of a compromised server network, and the possibility that James Weller, methodical and disciplined and careful for 30 days, had not been working alone. She found Cho in the corridor outside the storage room where they had assembled earlier. He was carrying the isolated laptop and looking at her with the expression of someone who has been thinking about the same problem from a different angle. Second access vector, he said, before she could say anything. You're thinking the same thing. I've been thinking it since I saw how clean the ghost credential construction was. That's not one person's work. The operational security design and the technical execution, they're distinct skill sets. Usually you see one or the other, not both, not at that level. How long to audit for additional credentials? Depends on whether they used the same construction method or varied it. If it's the same method, I'll find it in 3 hours. If they were smart enough to vary it, assume we're smart, Lauren said. Then 12 hours minimum, maybe more. Lauren looked at him. What do you need from me? Your pattern analysis, he said. The way you described identifying the access pattern from the operational data, the peak window timing, the query targeting. You were looking at it from the mission impact side. I was looking at it from the system architecture side. Together we'll cover more ground faster. Then let's go, Lauren said. They moved back toward the isolated workspace, and the corridor absorbed them. And behind them, the rest of the base was beginning to process what it didn't yet fully understand: a security breach. An arrest, a system that had been compromised and was now being taken apart and examined and rebuilt by two people who had not slept and did not intend to until the work was done. Because that was the thing about a threat that lived inside your own walls. You couldn't just push it back out past the perimeter and call it resolved. You had to find every trace of it, every thread, every ghost. And you had to be absolutely certain, not almost certain, not probably certain, but absolutely before you trusted the walls again. The isolated workspace had become something between a command center and a confessional. Lauren and Cho had been inside it for 2 hours and 40 minutes when Cho found the fourth ghost credential. Not a third, a fourth, because 20 minutes into the audit, he had found the third one buried in a system partition that wasn't part of the primary flight operations server at all, but in the scheduling backup archive that ran on a separate maintenance cycle. Quieter, accessed even less frequently. The kind of location that a thorough person would choose specifically because the standard audit protocols didn't cover it with the same rigor as the primary system. When Cho found the third credential, Lauren had felt something shift inside the investigation, the shift from one person operating carefully to a designed system built for resilience. A single operator didn't build redundancy. A single operator with one access point was vulnerable to exactly what had happened. Get caught at one location, lose everything. 3 credentials in 2 separate system partitions meant the operation was designed to survive partial discovery. And then Cho found the fourth. "This one is different," he said. His voice had the specific quality of someone who has been working at high intensity for long enough that surprise no longer sounds like surprise, it sounds like careful, controlled attention being redirected. The first 3 are all variants of the same construction method. Same underlying architecture, same logging bypass technique. This one, he paused, studying the screen. This one was built by someone who knew the first 3 existed and wanted to make sure it couldn't be found the same way. Lauren leaned over his shoulder. Different construction. Completely different. The first 3 exploit a gap in the logging protocol during peak traffic windows. This one doesn't touch the logging protocol at all. It's embedded in the system's own administrative maintenance function. Every time the server runs its automated overnight maintenance cycle, this credential gets a passive refresh. It updates itself, resets its access tokens, and leaves no trace in the user-facing logs because the maintenance cycle isn't logged the same way user access is. Lauren straightened. "How long has it been in there?" she said. Cho ran the check. He was quiet for a moment that lasted longer than Lauren wanted. 14 months, he said. 14 months. Lauren said nothing. She walked to the other side of the small room and stood there with her back to Cho for exactly 5 seconds. Not to compose herself, she was composed. To give the number room to become real before she responded to it. 14 months meant this wasn't something Weller had built. Weller had been assigned to Redstone for 8 months. The fourth credential was 6 months older than Weller's arrival. She turned back around. "Weller didn't build this one," she said. "No," Cho said. "He knew about it. He used it." Cho checked. "Yes. One of the 3 active ghost strings traces back to this credential as its authentication route. It's the foundation the whole operation runs on, which means Weller was brought into an operation that already existed," Lauren said. "He didn't start this. Someone handed it to him." The room was very quiet. Outside the door, the base was continuing its lockdown morning missions, suspended. Network restricted. People operating in the constrained, disciplined way that military units operated when they had been told something was wrong, but hadn't been told everything. Lauren could feel the weight of that, thousands of people affected by something built by one person 14 months ago and maintained since by at least 2. "Get Hargrove," she said. Cho reached for the door. "Wait," Lauren said. He stopped. She looked at him. "When you built the isolated environment and transferred the logs, did you copy the maintenance cycle data?" He thought for a fraction of a second. "No. The maintenance logs are on a separate administrative partition. I pulled the user-facing access logs." The fourth credential refreshes itself during maintenance cycles. Yes. Which means, if someone was monitoring the maintenance partition, if the person who built the fourth credential has alert set up to notify them when that partition is accessed. Cho understood before she finished. They'd know we found it, he said. The silence lasted about 2 seconds. Then both of them moved at the same time. Cho was back at the laptop. I need to check whether the maintenance partition access triggered any outbound notification. If there's a passive alert and I tripped it when I was building the isolated environment, how long ago did you access that partition? 45 minutes ago. Maybe 50. Lauren looked at the door. 50 minutes was enough time. Enough time to know the game was up. Enough time to make decisions. Enough time to start moving. Who built that credential? She said. 14 months ago. Who had the access, the technical capability, and the time to build something that runs on the maintenance cycle? Cho was typing. I'm running the personnel database back 14 months. Who was on this base? What clearance levels? What technical background? Run it faster, Lauren said. I'm going as fast as the door opened. Both of them turned. It was Marcus Webb. He stood in the doorway with an expression that Lauren had not seen on him before, not the calm professionalism of the checkpoint, not the measured authority of a senior NCO managing a situation. This was something tighter, something that came from information received recently that had changed his understanding of how much trouble they were in. Sergeant Webb, Lauren said. What happened? Colonel Hargrove sent me to find you, Marcus said. We have a problem. He stepped inside and closed the door. Weller talked, he said. Lauren stared at him. He asked for a lawyer. He did. And then he waited until the lawyer arrived, and then he told Major Reese that he would give a full cooperation statement in exchange for consideration on the charges. Reese accepted preliminary cooperation. Marcus paused. Weller's first statement was about his handler. The word hung in the room. Handler. Not a partner, not a co-conspirator. A handler, the term that meant Weller hadn't been an independent actor. He had been a managed asset. Someone had recruited him, positioned him, directed his access queries, received his transmissions, and managed him the way an intelligence operation managed a source. Who, Lauren said. He named a person, Marcus said. Gave a name, a rank, a duty position. He looked at her steadily. Hargrove needs you in the interrogation room right now because the name Weller gave is someone currently on this installation. Someone who was in your debrief this morning. Lauren's mind moved through the people who had been in that room. Hargrove, Okafor Reese, Weller himself, Cho Park. The person she had not spent enough time thinking about because she had been focused on the data, on the credentials, on the system architecture. Park, she said. Marcus's expression answered the question before he spoke. Lieutenant Diane Park, he said. 14 months on this base. Intelligence background, signals training, systems administration access. Weller says she recruited him 8 months ago. She built the operation. She built the credentials, and she's been running him as a collection asset ever since. Cho had stopped typing. The three of them stood in the room with the weight of it. Lauren thought about the debrief room. Park had been there. Quiet, attentive, sitting slightly removed from the center of the table. Not asking questions. Listening carefully to everything Lauren said about ghost credentials, about transmission signals, about access patterns, about the fact that the evidence was in the data module, about the fact that the investigation was beginning. She had heard all of it. And then, she had left the room 40 minutes ago when Hargrove dismissed the broader group. Where is Park right now? Lauren said. That's the problem, Marcus said. She's not at her duty station. She's not in her quarters. The security team did a physical check of both locations in the last 15 minutes. She ran, Cho said. She had a 40-minute head start on the debrief room, Lauren said. She knew before Weller did that the operation was compromised. She heard me describe exactly what we had. She made the decision to move while we were still in that room. Where does she go? Marcus said. The base is in lockdown. The gates are all on elevated security. She doesn't go through the gates, Lauren said. Marcus and Cho both looked at her. She built a maintenance cycle credential that refreshed itself for 14 months without being found, Lauren said. She built an entire access architecture inside a secure military network. She didn't do that without building an exit the same way invisible, embedded in something routine, accessible at a moment's notice. She picked up her flight bag. She has a way out that doesn't go through any checkpoint we're watching. How do you know? Marcus said. Because that's how I would have built it, Lauren said. If you're careful enough to design a 14-month operation with built-in redundancy, you're careful enough to design an exit that doesn't depend on a gate being open. She moved past Marcus toward the door. Where are you going? He said. To Hargrove. And then to find her. The interrogation room was 3 minutes away at a fast walk. Lauren covered it in two, Marcus at her side. When she pushed through the door, Hargrove was standing at one end of a small table with Major Reese seated across from it, and between them a recording device and a notepad with 2 pages of handwritten notes already filled. Hargrove looked at Lauren's face and immediately said, "What else?" "The 4th credential," she said. 14 months old. Built by Park, not Weller. And she almost certainly had an alert set on the maintenance partition that notified her when Cho accessed it during the audit setup. Hargrove absorbed that time frame. If the alert fired when Cho accessed the partition, she had 50 minutes notice before Weller named her. She was already moving. She heard everything in the debrief room, Reese said. His voice was careful and controlled in the way that voices became when someone was managing a strong reaction. She knew what we had the moment Whitaker described the transmission data. She didn't just run, Lauren said. She's shutting down. She'll be trying to destroy whatever physical evidence connects her to the operation. Communications equipment, mobile devices, any hardware she used to receive Weller's transmissions, physical locations on base where she could do that, Hargrove said. Lauren looked at Marcus. Marcus was already thinking. The East Maintenance Bay. There's a shielded communications closet in there. Reese identified it earlier as one of the locations with the capability to transmit from the perimeter. If she had hardware staged there, she has hardware staged there, Lauren said. It wasn't a guess. It was the logic of the operation, the same logic that built 4 credentials, that ran transmissions in 44-second bursts, that timed everything to the peak traffic window. You staged your hardware close to your transmission point. You kept it somewhere accessible and inconspicuous that you could reach quickly when you needed to. That's where she is. Hargrove looked at Reese. I need security at the East Maintenance Bay right now. If we send a security team and she sees it coming, Reese started. She destroys the hardware and we have Weller's testimony and circumstantial evidence, Lauren said. If we don't go, she finishes destroying it anyway, and we have the same thing. But if someone gets there before she's done, how long does it take to destroy communications hardware? Marcus said. Depends on the hardware, Lauren said. If she's thorough, she has a physical destruction method already planned. Thermite or mechanical destruction. 2 minutes. Maybe 3. How long to get security to the East Maintenance Bay? Marcus looked at his watch. 4 minutes at a run from here, and Park has a head start of, we don't know, Lauren said. But she's already moving. Hargrove made the decision. Webb, get security moving to the East Maintenance Bay now. I want 2 people at every exit of that building before anyone goes inside. Radio silence hand signals only when they're in position. He looked at Lauren. You're with me. Lauren was already at the door. They moved through the corridor at the pace that was just below a run fast enough to cover ground, controlled enough not to broadcast alarm to the people they passed. Hargrove was on his radio for 30 seconds, using the specific clipped language of a commander, issuing orders that needed to be executed immediately and without questions. Then he put the radio away. If she's armed, he said, without looking at Lauren. She will be, Lauren said. She's been managing a clandestine intelligence operation for 14 months. She didn't do that without contingencies. What's her training background? Intelligence and signals, Marcus said. But she's been on this base for 14 months. She's had time to learn every access point, every blind spot in the security coverage, every shift rotation. She knows this installation better than most of the people who've been here longer. Does she know it better than you? Lauren thought about that for exactly one step. I know how she thinks, she said. That might be better. They reached the east side of the building and pushed through the exterior door. The maintenance bay complex was a cluster of low structures adjacent to the aircraft shelter area workspaces. Equipment storage, the communications infrastructure that supported flight line operations. The shielded communications closet that Marcus had identified was inside the largest of the maintenance buildings. In the back corner, behind equipment racks and workbenches that made it invisible from the main entrance. Marcus had positioned the security team in exactly the right places. Lauren could see them, or rather, she could see the specific absence of people in certain positions that told her trained eyes someone was there. Still waiting. Good positioning. The kind that said someone had briefed the team correctly. Hargrove touched her arm, stopped walking. She's in there, he said quietly. Not a question. The side door is on the north face, Lauren said. It's the one closest to the communications closet. If she came directly from wherever she was when she decided to move, she would have used the side door. Security doesn't have eyes on the north face, I know. Lauren looked at him. Give me 2 minutes, Whitaker, 2 minutes. I go to the north face. I see whether she's already done and gone, or whether she's still inside. If she's still inside, I signal you and the team moves in. If she's gone, we've lost the hardware, but we haven't walked into a building blind. You're not armed, Hargrove said. I don't need to be armed to look at a door, Lauren said. He looked at her for a moment with the expression of a commander who knows that the person in front of him is right about the tactical logic and is not fully comfortable with that. 2 minutes, he said. If you're not back in 2 minutes and you haven't signaled, I'll signal, she said. She moved around the north side of the building. The side door was ajar. Not open. Not closed. Ajar, the specific position of a door, left slightly open by someone who went through it quickly and didn't take the extra second to let it close fully behind them. It was a small thing. It was the kind of thing you noticed only if you were looking for it and knew what it meant. Lauren stopped, listened. From inside, a sound not loud, not continuous, intermittent. The specific metallic sound of equipment being dealt with urgently. Not destruction yet. Preparation for destruction. Disconnecting. Organizing, getting things ready to be rendered unreadable. She was still inside. Lauren pulled back to the corner and signaled Hargrove. The security team moved. They moved well, quietly. Coordinated, with the efficiency of people who had drilled for exactly this kind of entry and were executing it with the cold clarity of trained professionals. 2 people through the main entrance, 2 more through the side door that Lauren pointed to as they passed her. She followed them in. The communications closet was at the back of the building, behind 2 sets of equipment racks. When the security team reached it, they found Lieutenant Diane Parks standing over a metal workbench with a compact piece of electronic equipment in her hands and a look on her face that was not the panicked expression of caught doing something they hoped to get away with. It was the look of someone who had already accepted the outcome and was simply measuring how much she could still accomplish before it arrived. She had not started the physical destruction yet. The equipment was intact. Lieutenant Park, the lead security officer, said, "Put the equipment on the bench." Park looked at him. Then she looked past him. She looked at Lauren. Lauren was standing at the edge of the space, not blocking anything, not positioning herself between Park and the door. Just there, present, looking at her with the steady attention, direct attention, and who has tracked something for a long time and has finally come to the place where the tracking ends. Park set the equipment on the bench. She straightened. For a long moment, the only sound in the building was the ambient noise of the base outside distant. Normal, the sound of an installation going about its business in the specific limited way it could, while its mission systems were locked down. "You came back," Park said. To Lauren. "Yes," Lauren said. The ambush should have. Park stopped herself, looked at the floor for a moment, looked back up. "You weren't supposed to be carrying a data module with a directional trace. The directional capability was added to the collection package 60 days ago," Lauren said. "Upgraded cycle. Not in the standard mission documentation." Park's jaw tightened fractionally. The expression of someone locating the specific point where a meticulous plan encountered the one variable it hadn't accounted for. "A documentation gap. You can't control every variable," Lauren said. "No," Park said. "Apparently not." The security officers had her in handcuffs without resistance. She didn't fight it, didn't argue, didn't make a statement. The composure she maintained was not the composure of innocence. It was the composure of someone who had planned for this possibility and had decided in advance how they would behave when it happened. Professional to the end, or as close to the end as this was. Hargrove came through the door behind the security team. He looked at Park. He looked at the equipment on the bench. He looked at Lauren. "Get the equipment to Cho immediately," Lauren said. "Before anyone else touches it. Chain of custody from this moment." Hargrove pointed at one of the security officers. "You. Stay with the equipment. Nobody touches it until Sergeant Cho is physically present." The officer nodded. They walked Park out. Lauren stayed behind for a moment. She looked at the equipment on the bench, the hardware that had been the receiving end of James Weller's transitions. The device through which mission-critical intelligence had moved from a secure military installation to enemy forces for 8 months. Maybe longer. The full extent of what had been transmitted would take weeks of analysis to determine. She looked at it and felt the specific, tired weight of a mission completed at a cost that wouldn't be fully understood for a long time. She picked up her flight bag, turned toward the door. Marcus Webb was standing there. He had come in at some point without her noticing, which told her something about her current state of alertness that she filed carefully for later consideration. "Done," he said. "The recovery part is done," she said. "The rest of it, the full accounting of what went out. What it cost, what operations were compromised over 8 months, that's going to take a long time." "But the bleeding stopped," Marcus said. Lauren looked at him. "The bleeding stopped," she said. "Yes." They walked out together into the morning air. The base was around them, still locked down, still operating on restricted protocols, but intact. The missions would resume. The network would be rebuilt. Properly this time, with the holes found and sealed. The aircraft that were on the ground would fly again. She thought about her A-10, the one that hadn't survived the extraction. Sitting in pieces somewhere on a forward terrain, reduced to wreckage by the decision she had made to put it between herself and an ambush that had been built specifically for her. She had loved that aircraft the way pilots loved the machines that kept them alive over enemy territory. Not sentimentally, practically. The way you loved anything that had saved your life repeatedly and asked nothing in return except that you know how to fly it. It was gone now. She would fly another one. Hargrove found her outside. Walking back toward the main building, he fell into step beside her. "Park's being processed," he said. "Reese has the interrogation. Cho is with the equipment." "Good. The network forensic audit Cho's team will have preliminary results within 6 hours. He'll want to do a second pass after the first," Lauren said. "Don't let anyone declare the system clean on the first pass, I know." Hargrove paused. "The upcoming missions. All of them need to be replanned from scratch," Lauren said. "Every route, every timing window, every target package. If Park was running this operation for 14 months, anything planned in that window is potentially burned. That's 18 months of operational planning," Hargrove said. "Yes, sir." He was quiet for a moment, absorbing the scale of it. "Not just the investigation, Not just the arrests, but the full operational consequence, the unknown cost of 18 months of intelligence exposure. Aircraft that had flown into sectors where the enemy was ready. Missions that had encountered resistance that shouldn't have been there. Operations that had achieved less than they should have because the other side had the playbook. How did she recruit Weller? Lauren asked. Reese got the initial statement. Park was already on base when Weller arrived 8 months ago. She identified him during the first month, someone with the right access, the right technical background, and the right personal vulnerabilities. Hargrove paused. Financial pressure. Weller had significant debt from a family medical situation. Park found it. She approached carefully, built a relationship over 2 months, and made the offer with enough cover that he could tell himself it wasn't what it was. Lauren said nothing. She had seen it before. Not exactly, but the shape of it. The specific vulnerability that a careful person finds when they're looking for an opening, not the dramatic things, not the obvious failures of character, but the ordinary human pressures that accumulate quietly and create a crack that a patient, calculating person can work into a door. He made a choice, she said. Whatever the pressure was. He did, Hargrove agreed. And people are alive right now who might not be if the collection operation hadn't worked, Lauren said. That's real, that matters. But the people who flew into sectors where the enemy was ready, because of what he transmitted, that's real too. Hargrove didn't respond. There was no useful response. They walked in silence for a moment. Your technical brief, Hargrove said. The transmission signal documentation. I need it before the end of the day. You'll have it in 4 hours. And then you sleep, he said. And then I sleep, she agreed. She said it with the simple certainty of a commitment she fully intended to keep. Not because she wasn't needed anymore. There would be debriefs and documentation and follow-up interviews for days. But because the specific acute phase of this was over. The immediate threat had been found and stopped, and the evidence was secured, and the people responsible were in custody. She had done what she came back to do. The rest was reconstruction. Important, necessary, careful reconstruction. But it didn't require a pilot running on 76 hours without sleep to hold it together through sheer operational focus. It required coffee, procedure, and time. She could provide all three after she slept. They reached the main building, and Hargrove held the door. Lauren walked through and stopped in the lobby, orienting herself for a moment. The building had the specific, familiar smell of a military installation that had been running at elevated operational tempo, the slight edge of stress chemistry in the recycled air, the coffee that someone had been making continuously since before dawn, the clean synthetic smell of a building full of people doing difficult work. She had been in that smell for 17 years, it felt, at this particular moment, like something close to home. Cho was coming down the corridor from the other direction, moving with the focused speed of someone who has just made a discovery and is managing the impulse to run. He saw Lauren and Hargrove and altered course. The equipment, he said, when he reached them. Park's hardware, it's not a single receiver. He paused, collecting himself. It's a node. She wasn't just receiving Weller's transmissions, she was retransmitting them. Through this device, through a relay, to a destination outside this installation that I haven't traced yet. Lauren looked at him steadily. She wasn't running a collection operation for a handler, Cho said. She was the handler. Someone above her in the network was receiving what she retransmitted. Someone outside this base who we haven't identified. The three of them stood in the corridor. The investigation that Lauren had believed was resolved closed. The principals in custody, the evidence secured, opened again. Wider than before, deeper than before, with a thread that led somewhere none of them could see yet. Hargrove looked at Lauren. She looked back at him. I'll sleep later, she said. The relay destination took Cho 47 minutes to trace. Lauren sat beside him the entire time. Not watching the screen, she understood enough of what he was doing to follow the logic. But the technical specifics of network forensics at this level were his domain, and she knew better than to second-guess a specialist working at the edge of their capability. She watched his hands instead, the pace of them, the way they slowed when he was uncertain, and accelerated when he found a thread worth pulling. She had learned to read people through their hands. In the cockpit, instruments told you data, but hands told you confidence. Cho's hands were confident. That meant he was going to find it. Hargrove stood near the door without speaking. He had sent Okafor to manage the operational lockdown and Reese to continue the Park interrogation. And he had stayed because he understood that what happened in this room in the next hour was going to determine the shape of everything that followed. The arrests of Weller and Park were significant, but a network with a node and a relay and an external destination wasn't two people working a compromise. It was an operation with infrastructure, and operations with infrastructure had architects. Cho said, the retransmission goes through two relays before it hits a destination. First relay is a commercial server node in Eastern Europe standard cutout. Nothing unusual. Second relay is more interesting. How so? Lauren said. It's not a commercial node. It's embedded in a legitimate defense contractor communications system. A company called Meridian Systems. They do network infrastructure work for several military installations across the region. Hargrove moved away from the door. Closer. Meridian Systems has contractors on this base, he said. Yes, sir, Cho said. They've had an active contract here. For he pulled the information, 22 months. 22 months. 8 months longer than Park had been running Weller. 4 months longer than the maintenance cycle credential had existed. Lauren looked at Hargrove. The operation didn't start with Park, she said. Park was a continuation. Someone at Meridian, or using Meridian's infrastructure, built the original access architecture before Park was even assigned here, and Park was recruited into something that already existed, Hargrove said. Just like she recruited Weller into something that already existed when he arrived. Lauren paused. This is a layered operation. Every person in it knew only what they needed to know. Park didn't build the maintenance cycle credential from scratch. She was handed access to an infrastructure that someone else constructed, and she was given a role inside it. Cho looked up from the screen. Which means Park may not know who's at the top of this. She knows her handler, Lauren said. She received instructions from someone. The question is whether her handler is the architect or another layer. We need to get back to Reese, Hargrove said. He was already moving. One more thing, Cho said. Hargrove stopped, the final relay destination. Cho turned the laptop so both of them could see the screen. I've traced through the Meridian node. The data that Park was retransmitting didn't stay in Eastern Europe. The final destination resolves to an IP block registered to a communications firm in the Gulf region. He paused. But the IP block has a secondary registration that I almost missed. It's flagged in the NSA's monitoring database, a passive flag, not an active one. The flag was placed 14 months ago. 14 months. The same timestamp as the maintenance cycle credential. The NSA flagged this IP block 14 months ago, Lauren said. For what? Suspected affiliation with a state-sponsored signals intelligence collection program, Cho said. He looked at her. This isn't a criminal organization. This isn't mercenary intelligence work. The people receiving this data are working for a government. The room was very still. Hargrove's voice, when he spoke, was completely level. The levelness of a person who has just received information that expands the magnitude of a situation beyond what they had prepared for, and who is managing that expansion through sheer professional discipline. You're telling me that what came off this base mission planning data, air operation schedules, collection operation details, went to a foreign government's intelligence service. That's where the data trail ends, Cho said. Confirming the affiliation beyond the NSA flag would require resources above my level. It's above everyone's level on this installation, Hargrove said. This goes to AFOC immediately. He looked at Lauren. The Air Force Office of Special Investigations. This is no longer a base security matter. No, Lauren agreed. It hasn't been a base security matter since we found the fourth credential. Hargrove reached for his cell phone, then stopped. Looked at it. Looked at Lauren. Not on the network, she said. No, he put the phone back. I need a secure landline. A physically isolated one. He turned to Cho. Can you build me a communication pathway that I can use to contact FOS without it touching anything that's been compromised? Give me 15 minutes, Cho said. You have 10, Hargrove said and walked out of the room. Lauren stayed with Cho. 10 minutes later, Hargrove had his secure line. He used it for 4 minutes. When he came back into the room, his face told the story without words that contained. Serious expression of a commander who has passed a critical situation to the level of authority it requires and is now waiting for that authority to engage. OFAI is activating a field team, he said. They'll be on the ground within 3 hours. Until then, nothing changes. Lockdown holds. Park and Weller stay in secure custody. And the equipment and logs stay with Cho. Reese's interrogation of Park, Lauren said, continues. But now we know what questions to ask. Hargrove looked at her steadily. You identified the Meridian connection. That's the thread Reese needs to pull. Who at Meridian was Park communicating with? How that communication happened? What she was told, and Lauren nodded. Then she said, I want to talk to Park. Hargrove looked at her. Not for the interrogation record, she said. Before the FOC team gets here and she attorneys up fully and the conversation becomes purely transactional. I want 5 minutes. She'll lawyer every sentence, Hargrove said. I'm not asking her about the operation, Lauren said. I'm asking her something else. Hargrove studied her for a long moment. Then he said 5 minutes. Reese stays in the room. Park was in a small secure room 2 floors up, seated at a table with her hands folded in front of her, and her lawyer who had arrived by phone conference. A voice from a speaker providing periodic guidance in the specific, constrained language of legal counsel managing a cooperation situation. She looked up when Lauren walked in. Reese was already in the room. He looked at Lauren with the careful expression of someone who had been told to allow this but wasn't fully certain of the purpose. Lauren gave him a slight nod, not requesting permission, just acknowledging his presence, and pulled a chair to the opposite side of the table from Park. She sat down. For a moment neither of them spoke. Park looked the same as she had in the maintenance bay, composed, contained, carrying the specific instance of someone who had accepted the shape of what was happening and was managing the interior of it on her own terms. She was in her early 30s. Sharp features, dark eyes, the kind of face that gave very little away in ordinary circumstances. In these circumstances, it gave away slightly more. The AFOC team will be here in 3 hours, Lauren said. Park said nothing. After that, this conversation becomes impossible, Lauren said. So I'm having it now. My client, the speaker started. I'm not asking about the operation, Lauren said. To the speaker, then she looked back at Park. I'm asking about the ambush. Park's eyes changed. Not dramatically, but they changed. The positioning, Lauren said. 6 hours of preparation. The specific ingress corridor they used. It was good work. Whoever planned it knew A-10 operational parameters well enough to set the geometry precisely. She paused. How long had you been planning it? Park was quiet for 4 seconds. Then 60 days. Her lawyer said, Lieutenant, it's not about the network. Without looking away from Lauren. It's operational planning data. It's already in what you found. She looked at Lauren steadily. 60 days. From the moment we knew you were running a collection operation in that sector. You knew for 60 days. We knew you were collecting. We didn't know what you had until the mission file was queried. 4 days before the ambush. Yes. And the 4-second query on Operation 77 Kilo was enough to give them what they needed. The mission file contained everything, Park said. Route, collection parameters, return corridor. They had everything they needed to position correctly. Lauren looked at her. But I didn't use the return corridor. Something shifted in Park's expression. The first genuine, uncontrolled reaction Lauren had seen from her, a brief, sharp recognition of the specific detail that had undone 60 days of planning. "No," Park said, "you didn't. The aircraft was damaged in the initial contact," Lauren said. "The standard return corridor was inaccessible. I improvised an alternate route using terrain masking." "We know," Park said. "We saw the telemetry. So they lost me in the terrain. For 11 minutes. And by the time they reacquired your position, you had enough altitude to make the extraction point." Park looked at her with something that was not admiration, but was in the same neighborhood, the specific, honest assessment of a professional evaluating a performance that disrupted their work. "You made 11 decisions in 11 minutes that shouldn't have been survivable." The aircraft was showing structural failure indicators. "You held it together long enough. The aircraft didn't survive," Lauren said. "No. But you did." Park was quiet for a moment. "That wasn't in the planning." "It rarely is," Lauren said. She stood. She had what she came for, not evidence. Not admissions, but confirmation of the shape of the thing. The confirmation that the ambush had been precise and deliberate and designed specifically for her, and that the variable that defeated it was not superior resources or advance warning or institutional support. It was 11 minutes of decision-making in a failing aircraft over hostile terrain, by a pilot who refused to let the margin close before she found a way through it. She looked at Park one more time. "One question," Lauren said. "Not for the record." Park's lawyer started to speak. "One question," Lauren repeated calmly, still looking at Park. Park looked at her lawyer's direction at the speaker and then looked back at Lauren. "Ask." "Why aviation?" Lauren said. "You're technically sophisticated. Signals trained. You could have targeted any information stream on this base. Why specifically air operations? Why A-10 mission data?" Park was quiet for a long moment. "Because A-10s are the most effective close air support platform in contested," she said. "And the people receiving my data were operating in contested terrain. Taking out that capability, reducing the effectiveness of that support for ground troops, was the operational objective. It wasn't about the aircraft. It was about what happens to the people on the ground when the aircraft aren't there." Lauren absorbed that. The full weight of it. Not abstract intelligence exposure. Not theoretical operational compromise. Specific, deliberate degradation of the close air support capability that kept infantry alive in hostile environments. Every mission file that Park had transmitted, every timing window that Weller had queried, every operation that the enemy had known about in advance, all of it designed to reduce the number of times an A-10 showed up over a firefight. She walked out of the room without another word. In the corridor, Marcus was waiting. He had been waiting, Lauren realized. In various corridors all morning, patient, present, available without being intrusive. She had started to think of him as part of the operational furniture of this day, which was probably not fair to him, but was also not inaccurate. "Afosi is 3 hours out," she said. "Hargrove told me." He fell into step beside her. "What did Park say?" "Enough." Lauren kept walking. "The Meridian connection is real. Someone at Meridian Systems was her handler. Reese will get the specifics." "And above Meridian?" "State-sponsored," Lauren said. "Afosi will identify who. It's above this installation's resources." Marcus absorbed that. "So we handed it up, Lauren said. "That's the right move." They walked. The building around them was different than it had been at 4:47 that morning when Lauren had been standing outside a security gate in front of a young MP who hadn't read the paperwork. Different in the way that buildings felt different when the people inside them had been through something together, not visibly changed. Not dramatic, but carrying a different quality of air. The specific weight of a place where a difficult thing has happened, and is still happening, and is being handled. "Corporal Rolston is still at his post," Marcus said. "He asked me if you were okay." Lauren looked at him. "He asked specifically," Marcus said. "Walked over to me between gate rotations. Said he'd been thinking about the morning and wanted to know if you were all right." Lauren was quiet for a moment. "Tell him I'm all right," she said. "You could tell him yourself." "I will." She paused. Later, when this is done. They reached the stairwell and Lauren stopped walking. She leaned against the wall and let the building hold some of her weight for the first time since she had entered it. The decision was involuntary, her body negotiating a small concession from the operational focus that had been running the show for 77 hours. She let it. 30 seconds. The wall was solid and institutional and indifferent to how long she had been awake. And those qualities were, at this particular moment, genuinely comforting. Marcus stood nearby without commenting. "The technical brief," Lauren said, after the 30 seconds. "I still need to write it." Hargrove said 4 hours. "I'll do it in 2. After you write the brief," Marcus said. "What happens?" "FOC takes over the primary investigation. Reese continues the park interrogation under AFOC coordination. Cho finishes the forensic audit with AFOC technical support. The network comes back online in stages as each section is cleared." She ticked through it. "The operational planning for the next 72 hours gets rebuilt from scratch. Missions resume when the planning is clean." "And you," Marcus said. She looked at him. "After the brief," he said. "After the AFOC handoff. What happens to you?" Lauren thought about it honestly for the first time all morning. Not as a logistical question, she knew the answer to the logistical question. Medical follow-up, formal debrief, incident documentation, the long administrative tale of a classified operation and its consequences. She would be in meetings and interviews and written assessments for weeks. But Marcus wasn't asking about logistics. "I go back to flying," she said. "Another A-10? Whatever they give me." She straightened away from the wall. "The mission doesn't change because the aircraft does." Marcus nodded. He looked like he was going to say something and decided not to. Lauren appreciated that. She started up the stairs. She wrote the technical brief in 93 minutes. Not 2 hours. It was complete, every detail of the directional signal capture, every parameter of the transmission analysis, the full technical profile of the layered encryption method, the frequency characteristics, the 44-second burst pattern, and the correlation methodology she had used to connect the transmission to the maintenance cycle credential infrastructure. She wrote it in the plain, precise language of someone who had spent 11 years translating complex operational reality into documentation that the people who hadn't been there could understand and use. When she was done, she read it once, corrected 2 numerical values she had carried in her head slightly imprecisely, and sent it to Hargrove through the isolated communication channel Cho had built. Hargrove's response came back in 4 minutes. 3 words. Exactly what's needed. She put the document down and sat in the small quiet of the room for a moment. The AOC team arrived at 9 minutes past 10 in the morning, 3 hours and 22 minutes after Hargrove had made the call. 4 agents, 2 technical specialists, and a lead investigator named Special Agent Patricia Malone, who moved through the building with the specific economic authority of someone who had been doing this long enough to be unimpressed by the complexity of what she was walking into. She was briefed by Hargrove and Reese in 30 minutes. She reviewed Cho's isolated log transfer in 20. She read Lauren's technical brief in 15. Then she came to find Lauren. Lauren was in the corridor outside the documentation room, eating her second nutrition bar of the day, a full bar this time. Not a compressed one, retrieved from the base cafeteria by Marcus, who had appeared with it without being asked, and said only eat before walking away again. Malone introduced herself, shook Lauren's hand with the firm, direct grip of someone who was measuring you and not hiding it. "Your brief is the clearest technical intelligence summary I've read on an insider compromise case in 6 years, Malone said. "That's not a compliment, it's a statement of fact." "Understood," Lauren said. "I want to debrief you firmly before I do anything else," Malone said. "Everything from the moment the directional signal was captured in the forward position through the discovery of the relay node. every detail in the sequence. That's going to take several hours, Lauren said. I know. Can you do it now? Lauren finished the nutrition bar, folded the wrapper, looked at Malone. Yes, she said. The formal debrief took 4 hours and 11 minutes. Lauren gave it with the same completeness she had given everything else that morning, every operational detail, every analytical inference, every decision point and its reasoning. Malone asked precise questions and took precise notes and interrupted only when she needed a technical clarification, which was not often. By the end, Lauren could see that Malone had assembled the same picture she had been building, all morning, not identical, because Malone was seeing it from the investigative outside rather than the operational inside. But coherent. The shape was clear. When it was over, Malone closed her notebook. The Meridian connection will take us weeks to fully unwrap, she said. The state-sponsored endpoint months, possibly longer, depending on diplomatic considerations above our level. Will it be followed? Lauren said. Malone looked at her. It will be followed. That's a guarantee I can give you. Lauren nodded. Malone said, You need to sleep, I know. That's not an observation, Malone said. For the next phase of this investigation, I need you rested. The debrief today is complete. Tomorrow I'm going to have more questions, and I need you to be able to answer them with your full capacity. Not what you have left after 78 hours without sleep. 79, Lauren said. Go sleep, Malone said. That's an order from an AFOC special agent who has the authority to make it one. Something moved through Lauren's face, not quite a smile, not quite amusement, but the closest thing to either that she had managed in the past 4 days. Understood, she said. She found Hargrove before she left the building. He was in the operations section, watching the preliminary network restart as Cho's turn cleared the first partition. The base was beginning to breathe again, carefully. Partially, but beginning. The specific, cautious return of an institution to its function after something had tested it hard. I'm going to quarters, Lauren said. Hargrove looked at her. Good, the AFOC team has everything they need. Cho's audit is in good hands. Reese has enough from Park's cooperation statement to keep the interrogation productive. We're okay, Hargrove said. Go. She started toward the door. Whitaker. She stopped. Turned. Hargrove looked at her from across the operations section, the room that had been the center of an intelligence compromise for 14 months and was now, with slow and careful work, being reclaimed. What you did today, he said. He paused, not searching for words, organizing them. Coming back with that module, running the logic on the credentials before you'd been awake for a straight day. Going to the maintenance bay. He paused again. The work you did today closed something that could have run for another year without being found. Lauren looked at him. I had intelligence that needed to be here, she said. That's all. Hargrove shook his head slightly. That's not all. And you know it's not all. She did know. But she also knew that naming it too explicitly, making it large in the moment before she had slept, would make it something other than what it was. It wasn't heroism. It wasn't exceptional. It was the accumulation of training and experience and the specific, unglamorous discipline of doing your job completely, even when completing it cost you something. She had always done her job completely. She always would. She walked out of the building. The morning had become full daylight, the flat, clear light of a base that was visible in all its practical, functional reality. The runway was still quiet, mission still suspended, but the quality of the suspension had changed. It wasn't the frozen stillness of a system compromised and uncertain. It was the deliberate pause of a system cleaning its house before it resumed operating. There was a difference, and Lauren felt it. She walked across the open ground between the main building and the personnel quarters, and as she did, she passed the security checkpoint where she had arrived at 4:47 that morning. Corporal Denny Rolston was at his post. He saw her coming from 20 yards out, and he straightened, not to attention, not in the formal military sense, But in the way, a person straightens when someone they've been thinking about appears, and they want to be standing correctly when the moment arrives. Lauren slowed as she reached him. He looked at her directly, which she respected. No looking away, no awkward deflection. Whatever he'd been carrying about the morning, he was carrying it forward. "Not around, ma'am," he said. "Sergeant Webb said you were okay. I told him to tell you that," she said. He nodded, took a breath. "I did some thinking today. I know," she said. "I was wrong. Not just about the procedure. I was wrong about how I looked at you when you walked up to that gate. I decided what I was seeing before I looked." He paused. "I don't know everything that happened inside today. But I know something happened that mattered. And I know you were in the middle of it." Lauren looked at him. "Corporal Rolston," she said, "the thing that makes a good gate officer isn't whether you stop the wrong people. It's whether you're willing to be wrong about who the wrong people are." She paused. "You were willing to revise your assessment when the evidence required it. That's not nothing." Rolston was quiet for a moment. "Next time someone comes to my gate, looking like they've been through something hard," he said, "I'm going to read the paperwork first." "That's a good start," Lauren said. She walked past him. She walked across the runway. The same runway where she had landed other aircraft after other missions. Where she had climbed out of cockpits in full gear and walked toward debriefs with the specific relief of a pilot who has come back from something and knows it. She had stood on this runway many times. She had never stood on it quite like this. Because this time, she had not come back from a mission in the air. She had come back from something harder, the specific, exhausting, unglamorous work of protecting the people on the ground, not from an external enemy, but from the compromised infrastructure that was supposed to keep them safe. She had carried classified intelligence through hostile terrain and an unsympathetic gate and 79 hours without sleep, and she had placed it in the right hands and followed every thread it generated until the network it exposed was dismantled and secured and handed to the authority that could pursue it to its source. She had done what a combat pilot does. She had identified the threat, engaged it, and brought her mission home. The quarters building was ahead of her. She walked toward it. Her arm was throbbing in the reliable, patient way it had been for hours, and her legs were carrying the weight of the day in every step. And her mind, for the first time since she had pulled the data module from the forward position 300 miles away, was beginning to release its grip on the sequence of events and allow the completion of the mission to become real. She pushed through the door, found her quarters, sat on the edge of the bunk, and for a moment, before sleep took her with the absolute finality of a system that had been held at operational capacity for 4 days and had been given permission to stand down, Lauren Whitaker sat in the quiet and let the morning be what it was. Not a triumph, not a story, not a lesson about what you could survive, or what you deserved, or what anyone owed you for the hardest things you'd done. Just the work, completed. The intelligence was delivered. The network was dismantled. The people responsible were in custody. The missions would fly again, cleaner and safer than they had been for 14 months. Somewhere beyond this installation, A-foci would follow the thread to its source, and the architecture that had been built to degrade American close air support capability would be taken apart piece by piece and understood fully and prevented from being rebuilt. It had started with a 44-second transmission in hostile territory. It had ended here because a pilot had come home, a pilot nobody recognized at the gate. A pilot who looked, to the wrong pair of eyes, like someone who didn't belong. Who was dirty and exhausted and carrying nothing visible except a damaged flight bag and the weight of something nobody else could see. But the weight was real, and she had carried it all the way home. And that was the only thing, in the end, that had ever mattered about Captain Lauren Whitaker. Combat pilot, 11 years and hundreds of missions and one 79-hour day, that ain't everything, not how she looked when she arrived. Not how she was received at the gate, Not the uniform she wore, or the rank on her shoulder, or the recognition she was or wasn't given by people who saw her before they knew her. What mattered was that she came back. She always came back, and she always would.